Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks, wherever the heck in the world you are. It is the one and only Harley Schlanger, along with yours truly here. And Harley's going to break down the latest news, the views, and all the information that's important to you. You can check out his work over at the LaRouchePack.com. LaRouchePack.com. Also, check him out over at the SchillerInstitute.org. The SchillerInstitute.org. With that being said, Harley, welcome back, my friend.
Good to be with you, V.
Harley, it's always a pleasure. There's so many things going on. The theatrics of Washington, D.C. Yesterday, Adam Schiff almost broke down in tears as he ended the fifth episode of the soap opera called The Impeachment of Our Lives. And Schiff literally cried.
I actually almost the shitstorm over Washington.
Exactly. Oh, man. Harley, where do you want to begin? We have that going on in D.C. We have supposedly 3,000 troops that have been moved to Saudi Arabia. We have the shenanigans with the China trade talks, the recognition of the Hong Kong protesters by the neocon Senate. How do you want to tackle this? And let's not forget Bolivia, as well as Argentina, and also the latest rumblings that Lula is out of prison in Brazil. Lots of things going on.
Don't forget Colombia.
Yes, a powder keg in Colombia. A powder keg.
An election coming up in Britain. You have the indictment of Netanyahu.
Yes.
Look, partly because we're in the United States and that's our focus, and also because the United States is still the major player. The place we have to start is why the hell would people like Schiff and Pelosi and all the media in the country and the networks in the State Department, in the intelligence community, why would they make a decision to act like such idiots with putting online this presentation of the so-called impeachable acts of Donald Trump in blackmailing Ukraine? You know, you have to realize they're desperate.
Yes.
They have to stop him. And the reason is that their intention from the time of the 2016 election was to continue the post-Cold War unilateral geopolitical games that assured the most powerful position for U.S. financial interests and those of our allies. And secondly, the continuation of the military-industrial complex's investment in weapons, defense spending, security arrangements, and so on. And
Right.
Trump threatened all of that by winning the election.
Yep.
And they've now seen when he was somewhat unleashed after the collapse of Mueller, he went over with Putin and Erdogan and negotiated this deal in Syria,
Yes.
which showed that he was serious. He believes that nations should have the sovereign right to determine their own events in their own territory. We see also that he's trying to do that now with Ukraine.
Yeah.
The important thing about Ukraine is that President Trump never was a supporter of lethal weapons to Ukraine from the first point. You remember in his 2016 platform, he and Manafort moved to take out a plank saying that the U.S. should provide lethal weapons to Ukraine. Why? Well, if you look at Ukraine, and this is I want to focus on this because it's so important. I just had over the weekend a chance to meet with Natalia Vitrenko, who is a leading economist, a former candidate for president in Ukraine, someone who opposed the Poroshenko regime, who is now supporting Zelensky. But what she said is that you have to realize that in 1991, Ukraine had the 10th largest economy in the world when it came to GDP per capita. In spite of all the problems and failures of the Soviet system, Ukraine had a full set machine tool capability. They built rockets, they built nuclear power plants. You know, their nuclear power plant wasn't so good as we saw with Chernobyl. But they
built some ships too, my friend. Some
ships,
really big aircraft.
Yeah, tanks. Airplanes, 250 airplanes a year they built in 1991.
Yep.
And so they had a full economy that once the Soviet Union fell, the geniuses at the US Treasury and the State Department joined hands with the City of London and Wall Street
Of
to
course.
carry out shock therapy against the newly freed nations. Instead of helping them, which we should have done,
Right.
we sent them to the International Monetary Fund, which imposed conditionalities.
Yeah.
Now, just some of the figures on what happened to Ukraine are just so astounding as to be hard to believe. The Ukraine, just as an example, went from having 25 million head of cattle in 1991 to 3 million head of cattle today.
Oh my God.
Uh, the
What did they do? They
population has
culled their
fallen.
entire population?
Yeah, they sold it off. They shut down. They built 250 airplanes in 1991. They didn't build a single plane in 2018. With the privatizations, the banking reform, which meant that they set up a private central bank in Ukraine. They privatized everything, including pensions. The standard of living collapsed. The population of Ukraine was over 50 million people in 1991. Today, it's about 32 million. That's because of a higher death rate and people just fleeing the country. Now, who did this? Well, it was the International Monetary Fund. It started under Bush. It continued under Bill Clinton. The guy who was in charge of the transition of the Soviet bloc economies recently came to prominence. His name is Taylor, William Taylor, the guy who was the first star witness of the Schiff hearings. Taylor was in charge of that. Taylor, by the way, also in 2004, 2005, was in charge of Iraqi reconstruction, which meant that those pallets of dollars that disappeared in Iraq, those were sent over by him and they never really investigated them. Now, same thing with Kent, with Yovanovitch, with Fiona Hill. These are hardcore cold warriors who are, whether you call them military industrial complex, deep state, British intelligence operatives, these are the people who presided over the destruction of Ukraine in 1991. And then in 2014, supported the coup in Maidan with additional funds from George Soros, with Joe Biden working as the point man for the Obama team. Brennan was involved in it. John Kerry was involved in it. Christopher Steele was involved as an operative of this coup plot in Ukraine. And everything that was done between 1991 to 2013 to wreck the economy accelerated between 2014 and today. So when these guys go up there and say to Schiff, we're testifying about this because Ukraine is crucial to American security, and we want to do what's right for Ukraine and protect the United States, and Trump is selling them down the river for his own personal gain, that is such a load of hogwash.
Right.
It's a complete lie. They destroyed the country for the purposes of continuing the Cold War drama and the possibility that it will become a hot war.
These people are sick.
Well, it's completely insane. And to argue they're doing this for the Ukraine and to argue that they're consummate professionals who are nonpartisan and are interested in the security of the United States, how does it secure our future to have a possible war in Ukraine, or to have Adam Schiff start out by saying Russia invaded Ukraine and we're
Never
not
happened.
going to do it again?
Right.
So
Insanity.
now, besides the fact that they're defending their corruption, there's a very interesting development that was just took place last week. One of the leading Ukrainian oligarchs is a guy named Kolomoisky. And he had been a supporter of Poroshenko, a supporter of the coup in Maidan, and now he's turned on it. And he was the leading supporter of Zelensky. And he attacked the impeachment proceedings and said that this is designed to put the US at war with Russia. And I can't believe the New York Times actually printed this. He said the impeachment effort is the last straw that will end up pushing Ukraine into its traditional alliance with Russia. And he said, and you know what? I'd rather be allied with Russia and Putin than with the International Monetary Fund. Then he went on to say that they want Ukraine to be involved in a war with Russia to the last Ukrainian. Now, of course, none of this is being reported, just as you look in vain on the mainstream media to see the exchanges occurring between Jim Jordan and Congressman Turner and others, where they're just driving a truck through the holes in the testimony of these great star witnesses of Schiff. But if you watch the media, what they say is they got Trump. They prove
exactly.
that it's a quid pro quo. All these guys admit it's a quid pro quo. And then even Sondland, under testimony or under questioning from the Republicans, said, well, he presumed that was the case, but he never had any evidence that it was. So they're going to go for an impeachment, which will never, ever provide enough evidence for a conviction in the Senate. But in the meantime, what else are they doing? I don't know, V, I'm sure you saw this and you've probably reported it. These reports in the last week from the New York Fed and the Atlanta Fed on what's going on in the fourth quarter of this year. The US GDP growth is going to be 0.2% or 0.3% growth. That's almost zero growth. That's close to being in an official recession. This is what's causing the panic in the repo loans, the new level of quantitative easing. There's a deepening sense in the financial world that there's got to be more cash, pump the pump, prime the pump, give us more. Why? Well, there was a stock yesterday, and I'm sorry I don't remember the name of it, but it plunged 98% and wiped out $5.6 billion on its books. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Oh man, it escapes me at the moment. I'm a little foggy.
This is what's happening. We're sitting on top of these piles of money that are going to disappear, and the result is going to be panic in the vast majority of the population in the United States because we're going to get the Ukraine treatment, and they want to get rid of Trump because they're fearful that under those conditions, Trump will escalate against the Federal Reserve and will defend the population from the criminal activities of private bankers, who, by the way, are the same people who work hand in hand with these neocons and neoliberals who are running the impeachment. So this is what I think is most important in the world, and we're seeing a spread of the insurgency against neoliberal policies. Now it's Colombia is blowing up. And for every country where there's an attack on this Wall Street, City of London policy like Chile, there's a counterattack, such as the one in Bolivia against Evo Morales, the fight going on in Brazil that you mentioned between Lula and Bolsonaro. This is everywhere you look. It's Wall Street, Brussels, London versus the people. And the people have very few real leaders. Trump is one of those leaders, and I think he's a limited person, but he's nevertheless shown tremendous courage in standing up against these criminals. And so we've got to make sure that he not only finishes his term, but actually has the freedom to, on the one hand, move against this permanent regime change faction of the deep state, which is in both parties. And then secondly, adopts policies that will rebuild the physical economy. And if we do that, we'll be okay. And if we don't, what's happened in Ukraine in the last 20 years will happen very quickly in the United States.
Yeah, it definitely will. My thing is this: when you look at how fast the Democrats are shifting this whole entire impeachment theater into overdrive, the fact that you can see that emotionally that Schiff was visibly shaking because they cannot get any sort of, not even a shred of modicum of any sort of traction, any sort of reality, evidential, circumstantial, or just even theoretical at this point, to get any sort of, impeachment. It's going to be, they know it, Harley. That's, I think the full brunt of the truth and the reality is starting to hit them, that their coup that they've orchestrated with their media cohorts is not working. It's not catching on. And the latest poll came out that now more than ever, even more Americans are distrusting of the politicians and big media. It's not working.
Well, and there's a big problem that they have, which is that they're they say something is true because they said it's true, like the Russiagate story. They still are insisting. Pelosi yesterday basically said Trump is controlled by Putin. That's what Fiona Hill said. You know, this nasty character who served under Bush and Obama and somehow was allowed to continue under Trump. Fiona Hill wants a war with Russia. Now,
she's insane.
Well, but what she said is Russia interfered. We know it because that's what the intelligence community said. Well, I'm sorry. The fact that she's citing the intelligence community as a source shows that she's an idiot who doesn't know anything, because the intelligence community on these large issues has proven to not only be wrong, but deliberately lying to shape policy over and above the desires of an elected president. In this case, Trump wants to end these wars. Look what they said about Syria. They said if we withdraw troops from that strip of border where the Kurds are between Turkey and Syria, there'll be mass slaughter of the Kurds. Everyone said that would happen.
Yep.
It didn't happen.
Didn't happen.
No, because Trump had a better plan. He worked with Putin, he worked with Erdogan, even with Assad, and you now have the prospect for peace there. What if that happened in Ukraine? Zelensky wants to meet with Putin. They're going to talk next week. Then you have the Normandy Four, which is Germany, France, Ukraine, and Russia. I don't think there's too much you can expect from Macron or Merkel. But the thing is being driven by Trump, who's not even part of the Normandy Four. He's basically saying to Zelensky, you can get a lot more aid from us if you're not involved in a war in eastern Ukraine. And so Trump's trying to stop that. And what are they saying? Don't mess with our wars. Same thing with Afghanistan. They're terrified that Trump may turn around again and get a peace agreement with the Taliban. So he's trying to shift away from this reckless geopolitical doctrine.
Right.
He's coming up against the people who, going back to the end of World War II, have gotten us involved in war after war at the expense of the American people, the people we go to war with. And by expense of the American people, I mean in terms of lives, not just lives lost, but lives damaged from the effects of war, and the trillions of dollars of debt that's piled on top of an unsustainable debt. So we're coming up to a moment of truth for the country. And as I said, I'm convinced now that the Republicans in the Senate will hold firm and they will not convict Trump. And so he's president until 2020. Now the question is, Schiff and other people's wet dreams aside, what are they going to do in the election? Are they just going to run by saying, well, Trump was impeached by the House even though the Senate bailed him out? Is that their campaign strategy? So it's not going to work. And we're going to end up probably with Trump getting reelected unless they do something to him. Now, under those circumstances, the issue is, what will he do? And I think the Barr-Durham report will have a devastating effect on this deep state operation. I think the Horowitz report coming out next week is going to smack people like McCabe and Comey and these guys right in the face. If I were John Brennan, I'd be looking for a bunker somewhere in Saudi Arabia.
I mean, if I was John Brennan, I'd either. My God, you know, I think John Brennan is going to have a convenient accident, Harley.
Well, I'm not sure what will happen to him, but he is one of the people who made himself available for these absolutely corrupt operations and ran them. And the fact that the Democrats defend him, when, Dianne Feinstein is not my favorite person, as you might imagine.
Of course.
But she had a Senate committee that was actually investigating torture run by Brennan at the CIA. And her committee's computers were hacked into by John Brennan's CIA operation. Now, how do you then turn around and embrace him when he says, we know for a fact it was Russia that interfered in the election? And I think we're going to get more evidence coming out on Ukraine, including the fact that much of the so-called documentation in the Steele dossier was provided by essentially Putin operatives who were trying to make fools out of the United States and were working through Ukrainian networks. It was the Ukrainians who provided a lot of the so-called documentation of Russiagate, all of which turned out to be false. Just like the black ledger used to get rid of Manafort that supposedly showed Manafort had $12 million in secret payments. Why didn't Mueller ever bring that black ledger into the courtroom? Because it doesn't exist. It's a media piece. It's a public relations act. So the more this is exposed, and I'll just tell your listeners, our website, LaRouchePAC.com, has a new 3-part series on what is Ukraine Gate that goes through the details, what I've mentioned about who is William Taylor, who is this George Kent, Yovanovitch, Fiona Hill, who do they really work for? Do they work for U.S. national security interests? Absolutely not. They work for this bankers cabal and this geopolitical regime change operation, and they work hand in hand with people like George Soros and so-called conservatives like William Crystal. So we've got to expose these guys and then get the policy right. And I think the most interesting thing is that even with the attempt to disrupt China with the Hong Kong operation, the Chinese are merrily going along building new high-speed rail, faster and faster trains, and now they're building them in Africa with the Africans. And we had at our conference some diplomats from a number of African countries, and they publicly said, we're not worried about a debt trap from the Chinese. We already have a debt trap from the International Monetary Fund and the British and the Americans. They're building something with us. That's what we want.
Correct.
So either we get on the right side of this thing or we lose.
Exactly. And for the folks that don't realize and don't know this, I mean, the last 50, 60 years of every sort of aid going into Africa, every sort of IMF loan have those has stipulations on it. And those stipulations are, number one, you can't build infrastructure. You can't build nuclear power plants. You can't build up any sort of energy infrastructure. If you can't do any of these things, you can't build an economy. You're permanently keeping the people depressed. You know, and then on top of that, the only thing you have is despotic regimes that prop up. And we've seen Africa thrown. I mean, look at the turnaround in Rwanda, Harley. My head spins when I read about it and I study about it. The turnaround's incredible.
Rwanda, Ethiopia. I was at a conference last week here in Berlin where the German government was trying to tell the governments of Ghana and Angola that if they give up fossil fuels and go with renewable energy, they'll get a lot of investment from Germany. And the Africans basically said, if that's all you're going to invest in, we don't need that. We have free solar energy in Ghana. The sun just shines on us. We don't need your help with that. We need to develop our real resources so we can have a full set economy. And the Angolans were really clear. Don't you come in and tell us we can't use our petrochemicals and our oil and gas to produce electricity so that everyone in our country has electricity in their home. We're not going to live with this colonialism anymore. And so you see a maturation of these regimes in Africa. You mentioned Rwanda. That's a perfect example. Ethiopia is another. And you compare that with the idiocy of Barack Obama going to Kenya, thinking he's a big rock star in Kenya. And then actually it was in South Africa. He lectured the South Africans who asked him, what do you think about our national nuclear energy program? And he said, if you think that you can have an American-style standard of living here, the planet will boil over. You can't do that. And the South Africans felt stabbed in the back by the guy they were told was an African-American leader. So, I think most Americans don't realize that there's a tremendous growth potential in Africa now. And the Chinese are there, the Japanese are there, the Indians are there, the Italians are there, the Spanish are there. You know who else is there? The Albanians are there. They're talking about funding with Italy a tunnel that goes under the Mediterranean, and not for refugees, but for goods that will be shipped from Europe to Africa, because Africa is going to become after China, the second largest consumer goods consuming continent. In fact, by 2050, Africa will be bigger than China, possibly.
It's going to be huge, and the opportunities there are massive. But you know what, Harley? Rest
Yeah.
assured, we have a great strategy for Africa already at play. It's called AFRICOM, Harley. AFRICOM. If it's not broke, we'll break it.
Well, I saw this hilarious thing about startups for Africa, where someone was saying we could build a computer, a mini computer company in your country, and it'll be great. And they said, well, there's only one problem. We don't have electricity for the computers. And they said, okay, well, let's build a battery company.
Mm.
And the African said, we're building satellites. We want to go into space. What do you guys think we are, savages?
That's exactly what it is, man.
Yeah.
I used to be like so many people before I started looking into it, where I was just like, yeah, these stupid Africans, what the heck is wrong with them? How come they can't get their act together? Why can't they overthrow these corrupt governments? Why, what is going on? And then you actually realize that you look into the loan programs, you look into the suppression of technology. They were not allowed to get a hold of certain technologies. They were not allowed to develop certain infrastructure. They were not allowed to have access to the type of resources as well as energy production that the rest of the developed world has. They were just not allowed. The only thing they were allowed to do was have some despotic tin pot dictators rule over them, so they can blow all the money, hoard it in Swiss bank accounts, and then allow the Anglo-American, the British Empire, the Anglo-American power structure to go ahead and rob, rape, and pillage the entire countryside for resources. That was the only thing they were allowed to do.
Yeah. Well, LaRouche referred to what you just described as technological apartheid.
Yes, I love that. That is a perfect term.
That's exactly what it was. And the idea that the Africans were, Frumenschen, early man, were not developed enough to do these things is disproven now by the fact that you have Africans studying in American universities and excelling in engineering. They're not going there to study sports management or betting odds. They're there to learn how to build an economy.
Absolutely.
That's what China did. And they're working with them.
Yes, exactly. And the whole thing is also it goes to show what we've all suspected for such a long time, Harley, is that there is some significant natural resources that is sitting under the earth in Africa.
Yeah.
Significant.
The other
probably
thing
some of the biggest deposits in the world. I mean, look at it this way. I mean, just from and I was in the strategic metals business. I was a broker for strategic metals. I brokered cobalt, which is used in everything from electronics to missile guidance systems to you name it. It's a strategic metal. You need it. Cobalt is huge. Mm-hmm. And I did cobalt, vanadium, molybdenum. We did rhenium, which you cannot build a fuel efficient jet engine without rhenium. So that's what I brokered. And then from there, moved into the precious metal side, right? Which would be, your gold, your platinum, and everything that I just mentioned, folks, between the strategic side and on the precious metal side, there are hordes of it in Africa.
Yeah. And the Africans are not going to let us come in and take it. Yep. And rig markets so that they go into debt. There's this thing that the IMF had called Strategic Adjustment Programs, SAPs, which basically stands for you're a sap if you go along with it. And the Africans have figured it out. And you see these people like the African State Department people, the equivalents of George Kent, telling the Africans, no, you have to go through strategic adjustment. And they basically are saying, stick it up your ass. We're not going to take a strategic adjustment program, or we're going for the full set economy. And I want to go back to Kent for one thing, which was the most outrageous thing of the whole Ukraine hearing so far. And that's a pretty broad statement because it's mostly outrageous. But Kent compared the neo-Nazi Azov battalion, that was the grouping that shot up the Maidan Square. They march with swastikas. They have pictures of Stefan Bandera when they march. Bandera was the World War II leader in Ukraine who headed up the Ukrainian SS under the Nazis. They're blatant neo-Nazis, and Kent described them as the equivalent of the American Minutemen in
Jeez
1776.
Louise, that's the Svoboda. These are Nazis.
Yeah.
Oh,
And what's interesting is that there are now some Democrats who are trying to embarrass Trump by saying maybe we shouldn't give aid to Ukraine because military aid ends up in the hands of these Nazis. Well, where were they when Barack Obama and Joe Biden called these Nazis the great freedom fighters when we financed the coup to bring them into power?
yeah.
So all of these lies and they're coming out. You know, there's an old Yiddish saying that the truth never dies, but it lives a miserable life,
Yeah.
but it keeps
Yeah.
living.
Right.
And we've got to make sure the truth comes out and that the liars pay the price.
Absolutely. I'm hoping and praying, man, that happens because enough is enough. And the whole world, the crazy thing is nobody believes their BS except a bunch of mentally deranged individuals who are heavily medicated on lithium and other psychotropics that are marching in the streets wearing pussy hats and holding signs and dressed up in Antifa garb. Apart from that, nobody else believes them.
Well, there's an arrogance of power, which the best way to look at it is the Greek gods, who thought they were in control of everything until all of a sudden, Gotterdammerung, the gods collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
And this arrogance is not pretty. And the fact that they have the money to jet set and fly around and lecture everybody doesn't mean they're going to have that power forever.
Correct.
And don't believe that. They think that the rest of the world, including most Americans, are too stupid to see through their operations. And those days are over, my friends. We now know enough that we're just not organized around solutions. And that's why I would urge people to go to LaRouchePack.com, take a look at the forecasts of Lyndon LaRouche over the last 50 years. We just had a conference commemorating him in right outside of Frankfurt in Germany, and it was amazing. I was looking at videos from Lynn speaking in New York City in 1978, in Berlin in 1988, one forecast after another. And as often as he was right, the media came out and ignored what he said and said, "Don't listen to LaRouche. He's a Nazi, communist, Russian agent, Ku Klux Klansman." And when I ran for Senate in 1990, they were telling people that I'm a right-wing Nazi. And I'd go to some of these editorial boards and I'd say, "Do you know that I'm Jewish?" And they'd say, "Well, you must be a self-hating Jew."
Unreal. Unreal.
But truth has a power. And ironically, one of the ways the truth is getting out is through Twitter, through Donald Trump's Twitter. So I think there's a reason that Twitter has been unable to suspend his account. And, bless him, he's got to keep doing it. And people have to start acting on what he's trying to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Harley, I'll tell you right now, brother, it's going to be a hell of a ride in December as you have the IG report coming out already. An FBI agent is under investigation for meddling with the documents for the FISA court.
Yep.
That is happening. We have already an investigation. John, what is that guy's name again? That the investigator for that bar has
Durham.
I keep forgetting Durham. That's right. We have Durham. Yes. Durham is already looking into Stefan Halper.
Yep.
And that is a fragile, weak-minded man, Halper, as I'm referring to, that will sing like a canary. So all the pressure points are on. And look, and now the revelation is coming out about Schiff's link to Ed Buck.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe that's why Schiff was in tears towards the end of today. He feels it.
Well, I don't think Schiff would have spent much time with Epstein because the teenage girls would have broken him in half.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh, man.
Hey, Not to have some schadenfreude over something like this, but look at what happened to Prince Andrew, the Queen's favorite.
Oh, yeah, now he's gone. I'm hearing already that there are requests heading out to Buckingham Palace to have him brought in for questioning.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Incredible. So things are happening. Things are happening. I just looked at the latest Fox headlines right now. It's saying that the president's counterattack against the impeachment has begun. So it's going to be an interesting December, to say none the least, Harley.
Well, people should stay tuned to this station and keep hanging with Harley.
Absolutely. And folks, with that being said, we are over and done. And also check out Harley again on the SchillerInstitute.com, the Schiller Institute, I'm sorry, the SchillerInstitute.org, the SchillerInstitute.org. And with that being said, folks, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and that notification bell is vital so you are alerted to when Harley comes on. With that being said, enjoy your weekend.